Alright, we are live again. Welcome back to the thing. So this computer has been running Setup Alpine continuously since the last stream, which wasn't even yesterday since I skipped a day. So for more than 24 hours this thing has been running. I think it actually might have gotten stuck near the end of the process though. So let's take a look at what's going on and try to pick up the pieces. So I've got a working TTY console here, like a VGA console. It's just showing top right now, but I figure we can use that if we need it, but it's maybe more convenient to use the serial console as long as it's working. It also started SSHD. I can attempt to SSH into this thing. Currently that doesn't work because I only have a root account and SSH login as root is disabled by default. Yeah, so we were just running through the usual setup Alpine process. So the context here, Alpine is a minimal Linux distro that is often used in containers and on servers. Here we're using it on a 486 based logic board for an old voting machine. And I've got kind of an opportunity to split up the work in setting up a Linux distro between like a normal post-install kind of process and the actual image builder process. I've got a lot of opportunities to customize the image building process because I'm just doing it all with makefiles and Docker at this point. It's been useful because the bootloader on this had to be somewhat weird and I've had to patch a lot of components of the system. This is the board up here in the corner. That yellow card that you can barely see that 64 megabyte label on is what we're running grub off of. That is a card that the BIOS knows how to read from, and we have very limited amounts of space there because the BIOS doesn't seem to want to even touch larger cards. And even my little 64 meg card is starting to fail, so I've got some bad blocks there I'm dodging. So a little 4 megabyte image on there with grub, and then grub is enabling PCMCIA, which is one piece of magic we've had to incant over this board. And grub knows enough PCMCIA to get us onto the storage card, which has an SD card based emulator, so we can now just run off of the 64 gig SD card, which is what we're running now. So the current setup is I've got a read-only grub image built in Docker, which we're booting off of that compact flash card, which then transfers control to an image that I built in Docker and then copied to a partition on that 64 gig card. So there's some other partitions we can use for things like a home partition and whatever. But I've got currently a 2 gigabyte partition that I built in Docker with a bunch of pre-installed packages and copy it on here. But I'm running the setup Alpine script on the actual device, and it's just very slow. I think some of it is due to its swapping, because it's just using a lot of memory to do package manager kind of things. If I remember right, this board has 32 megs of memory. I found myself doubting whether it was 32 megs or 24 megs, but I think it's 32 megs of memory. We can double check. And so I enabled a bunch of swap space on this card, which is reasonably fast, but it's still swap space on a PIO mode ATA device. So, you know, it's not going to be great. This whole thing is slow, right? It's 66 megahertz. It originally ran a fairly small embedded operating system for the voting machine, it doesn't really have to push a lot of data around because it's got a 2D graphics accelerator that actually handles driving this 1024x768 screen normally. So I'm going to suspend this and let's see what is actually going on. I might also try to get an SSH connection in here because I'm nervous about losing access via serial and then having to rely on the extremely glareful physical console. We could turn off the lights in here and it'd be better, but it's nice actually having flexibility with the lighting. And the screen just gets tons of glare. I've gotten so close to just wrapping the screen and camera there in some kind of like opaque medium. I just don't know how I'd do that such that it wouldn't be an eyesore and otherwise likely to just attract my cat's wrath. Like I have this light blocking foil that I've used elsewhere in the studio. I could wrap it with that, but my cat would immediately destroy it. Hello everyone in chat. Alright, let's see, okay, so let's do a minor detour to set up another user account and then try to figure out what setup Alpine is doing. Currently it is suspended, so it shouldn't cause any harm. Yeah, 32 megs total. I guess our RAM isn't even full. So yeah, I don't know what... So setup Alpine made it to the last stage in its process, which is setting up this APK cache. And I don't know what's actually going on there. I think I might have given it some input at the wrong time, which maybe confused it, and maybe the shell script is doing something bad with that, but it's also possible it's just thrashing swap or waiting on something on the network. But it's been running for like a day now, so whatever it's doing, I probably don't need the rest of it at this point. You can see we've got a DHCP client, an NTP client. Once we're done investigating the system's current state, we could reboot it and just see if setup Alpine has managed to actually start things properly. Do I want to run bash? Do I have enough memory for bash? I think I'm probably already in bash. Oh, maybe it's ash. Whatever. I don't super need to set a password for this, right? Like, I kind of just want a cheesy root password that I can use for the local login, and then like a key I can SSH in with. Oh, I also wanted to mount an actual home partition. I made the mistake of running Vim before. I was trying to edit the FS tab with Vim, and the syntax highlighting was bogging it down so badly. Okay, so this is no longer the actual root partition. I don't even know if I want an FS tab entry for the compact flash card, because normally I'm not going to be interacting with it. I want to just treat it as a bootloader and not much else. Oh, not Vim. You can control C Vim while it's still loading. Yay, so much space now. I don't know if I want to try installing a package just quite yet. Yeah. How long is it going to take to generate SSH keys on here, I wonder? Is the echo back? I think usually what's happening when you hear the echo is that I'm not close enough to the microphone. Sorry, I haven't been monitoring the audio like I usually do because there's enough delay on the filter chain that it screws up my speech process. Is the echo gone when I'm actually close to the mic? And we can also turn down the other microphone. How's that? That's interesting. I expected I would see something SSH related on the output of top there. Is it low on entropy, maybe? Do serial interrupts help? So yeah, read the audio. I expect it'll sound pretty echoey when I'm like being lazy and leaning back like this versus when I actually get close to the mic. I expect the volume to be similar, but the echo to be much better in this configuration at least. Does that mesh with what you're hearing over there? Gosh, why is this so pokey now? We could see what the oscilloscope has to say. How about that 152 amps? I think those are timer tick interrupts. I wasn't looking super carefully, but I mean, the regular pattern kind of gives it away. And I think the first couple of addresses in there might have been timer or interrupt acknowledgements. There's a question from chat. What do I do with all that hardware? Can I make robots? The thing that I do with that hardware is the thing that you're seeing right now. And you could potentially use some of this for robots, although there aren't any motors here right now. Like these pieces are not even all of the pieces that go into just one of the voting machines. So like it looks like a bunch of pieces, but that's just because it's all taken apart. Oh gosh, what is this waiting on? Do we have fun toys like S-Trace and L-Trace on here? I have GDB, right? Oh, is that what the bus looks like when we're actually doing I/O? There's a request for clarification about whether or not I take shit apart and test it out. That is a thing that I can do, sure. I would describe this as entertaining people by turning e-waste into slightly different e-waste. Like in this case, it's an old voting machine that someone was selling on eBay years and years ago that I picked up and have been occasionally doing weird things with. It's actually just kind of like a weird, kind of anachronistic computer. It's got pieces that are definitely from the early 2000s and pieces that are definitely from the mid 90s. Physical e-waste into digital e-waste. I mean, yeah, basically I take the physical garbage and then I give you like large amounts of data, which then I'm mostly responsible for storing. Yeah, anything but voting. I agree. The voting machine is not good at voting. The whole idea of a voting machine is usually pretty flawed, and these are a particularly bad example. Okay, so we were doing something in libcrypto. That's Why isn't this showing up on top? This looks like it's in purely CPU-bound code at this point. There's another comment in chat that I can find a lot of secrets in the machine. All computers are collections of very mundane secrets, basically. Like, we've been uncovering plenty of secrets, but they've been things like, oh, how did they mess up the PCMCIA controller in this particular way? Or how exactly is the text LCD attached? Oh, are we actually swapping? Kswapd was showing up on top there, but it doesn't look like the system's doing much I/O. This is also not the version of top I'm used to. I don't know how to make BusyBox top show me page ins and page outs. Oh yeah, maybe this is just a problem with top. The totals up there, which are really hard to see in the washed out glare, say that it's 95% busy in user space. I'm just not actually seeing the process. Alright, like under percent CPU, I'm seeing 5% under top. I think top might just be behaving weirdly, like either it's broken or I put it into a weird mode by accident. Is it different if I just restart top? Now we can see SSL or SSH keygen using up 94% CPU. That's better. Okay. Mystery solved. See, like that, a very mundane secret that no one was actually trying to keep from me. And now we're running SSH keygen inside GDB, which is sure to end well. So detach it before it starts hitting all those IO breakpoints, right? Comment from chat, and I thought SSH keygen took a long time on my OG Raspberry Pi, right? Yeah, I should have just prepared an entire canned .ssh directory and copied it over. At least we're not swapping yet. I guess if we have all this free IO, I could install some packages. We still have that setup APK cache in the background that I wanted to investigate. I was just hoping to have another way into the machine via SSH first. There's something satisfying about seeing the kernel tick rate on the oscilloscope so clearly. Right, that awk with all of the escape A's in it. I think I was pressing some other key and that got captured by one of the responses in the setup script. And I don't really need the APK cache at this point anyway. I think setup Alpine itself is still backgrounded in that shell that's running on the serial port. Oh, 2 goes back. Hey. Oh, honey. Okay, that's yours now. I get it. Hmm. Hmm. Oh, hey, honey. Whoa, honey Tuco. You want attention? And okay. Mm. Gosh, finally. Yeah. Oh, okay. Can we get any more with this? Oh man, look at SSHD work hard. Alright, asking me for password now. I have to check my SSHD config file. To go. Honey. To go. Does it care about the group permissions? To go, this is not very comfortable. Yeah, I think that was it. I'm wondering if maybe SSHD might not be aware of the home mount point changing somehow. I don't know why that would matter. It's just also kind of hard to debug this while I'm sitting on the edge of my seat with this cat. To go. I don't know why this wouldn't let me log in. Somebody was wondering whatever happened to Wiggleport. I didn't know anybody even cared about Wiggleport. And basically I decided it was not a good idea and just didn't do it. Like, it was fun to design, but it wasn't actually a thing anybody needed. Oh. I guess I get my seat back. Tuco, don't stand on the screen, please. Oh, why are you biting that? Honey. Honey, do you need more real food? Tuco. Well, you finished this from a minute ago. Will you eat that? Yeah? Oh. Right, I gave it the key for a different computer. I kind of wanted to give it both those keys, actually. Yeah, this cat is pretty distracting sometimes. Now he wants the door open with the heaters on. Hey, Tuco, stop that. Tuco, eat things. Don't take apart the door. Tuco, stop that. Hey. 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 Hey, hey, hey. Hey. Hey, I know, but don't open the door while the heater's on. Dude. Oh my gosh. Tuco. There's a question about what the oscilloscope is displaying. That is showing the bus activity on this computer that we're using. It's connected to the PC104 port. The bottom bus there is showing bits 4 through 12 of the, or 4 through 11 of the address bus. And then those other pins are like IO write, IO read, address latch enable, and some other nonsense in an order that I don't recall. I think 10 is address latch enable, or maybe one of the IO pins. Tuco, stop that, gosh. Seriously, what do you want, little boy? Tuco, I don't want to open the door. Tuco, I understand you. I'm trying to say no. Tuco, eat this. Tuco, quit it, honey. Tuco, eat things that are food. Yeah, no, there's still something wrong on the server end. What is with the permissions on that home dir? Tuco, honey, what can I do to distract you from that? I think Tuco might be trying to fight with my housemate over the thermostat at this point. Try turning off the heater in here and opening the door for my cat. Okay, boy. Yeah, okay, I get that's what you really want. Wow. Cat really wants the fresh air. There's a question from chat asking whether I'm working with a company right now, and if not, how do I earn my life? Which sounds awfully dystopian. I mean, I feel like everyone's got a right to live, right? And to have, like, housing and stuff. It's pretty dystopian that that's not actually how our society is organized. But I have a Patreon right now where people who are interested in what I'm doing choose to support me that way. If that goes bust, then I'll probably just stop doing this entirely and, I don't know, get a job at a hardware store or something. I really am just completely burned out on tech at this point. I don't think I would just get a job writing code for someone. I mean, maybe I will, but it seems like there are plenty of other things I'd rather do at this point. Yeah, maybe a bunch of us just haven't earned our life, and maybe that's gonna be. Maybe we're gonna have to start something about that. Yeah, that's pretty dystopian, right? Oh, we could try a password login. This is taking longer. Is it going to successfully log in with the key now that there is a password set? Yes. Okay, so I guess this is just set up so that I have to have the account set up with a password before I can log in with any key. That wasn't entirely what I wanted, but sure. Anyway, let's try to have sudo now, maybe? Yeah, are we actually installing a package? This is plenty fast enough when the SSH daemon is paged in. Which other versions of top do we have? I guess we want proc PS. This may or may not have been the part that failed in the setup Alpine, though. Like, I don't know, it definitely downloaded some packages successfully. It was trying to set up some kind of local APK cache when it failed, but the failure might have just been related to bad input. It might have been something that requires more memory than just fetching the index here. Yeah, no, if you're asking me for tips on like how to survive under capitalism, I don't know that I have any answers either. Like, I feel like I'm like nearing the end of my list of things that I know about. Like, if it really seems like this video stuff is completely not working out, then yeah, maybe I can get a job in public transit or in, like, I don't know, selling groceries or something. Mostly I need something where, like, it's not a tragedy if my mental health is weird sometimes and I don't, like, need to travel. But, like, I don't know if I even want a desk job at this point. Like, it's hard to imagine being away from Tuco for much time, but, you know, I don't know, maybe after Tuco's gone, I can do something totally different. Yeah, I just have very little feeling that there's anything good to do with technology right now. Like, I don't dispute that it is possible for things with technology to be beneficial in theory, but like the process of structuring your life around trying to make that happen just leads nowhere good right now. Like, it seems like you can pretty much only do good things with technology by accident, and if you can manage to keep large amounts of money from becoming involved for a while. But as soon as anybody tries to turn it into a get-rich-quick scheme, then all other bets are off. We've reached that point several times over with the internet. Feels like even stuff that I was excited about for a while, like the Rust programming language, is at that point where it's got enough mass for people to be using it for get-rich-quick schemes. Anita UBI, yeah, basically. I mean, I think people have enough drive to try to, like, do things, right? They don't need the threat of being homeless and starvation to drive them to do things. I think generally when people don't do things, it's because they're exhausted rather than because they'd just rather not. So yeah, I mean, basically the whole system is a problem at this point, and working within it seems to have limited effectiveness. Duke really likes that view in the fresh air. Gosh, that top line on top there is just APK add sudo, still chugging away with 68% CPU. And it looks like the bus, I mean, we can look at what those addresses are maybe. I suspect that bus is mostly full of hard disk access. No, yeah, I think that's where Linux remapped the PC card to. So I set up the PC card at OX 170 in Grub, but I think Linux is remapping it to OX 400 or maybe 410. Is there something I can do with the citizen waiting on it? I want to try a bunch of stuff on here, but each of the things is so slow. At least Tuco's great. I don't think we've filled up RAM yet, necessarily. Right, what I'm seeing at the top of top, which is a little hard to read, it looks like 25 megs used, 1 meg cached, 800K totally free. So like not a lot, but it's, this isn't showing me the fill level on swap though, or the amount of page ins, page outs. It is acting like SSHD pages out. Or maybe the shell, something on this console. This is so much slower than a Raspberry Pi. Yeah, maybe I should just go back to thinking about how to make this kind of a thin client for a Raspberry Pi. That kind of defeats the purpose though, don't you think? Doesn't feel like I'm actually running any of the software on here if it's just a display for a Raspberry Pi. Oh, thanks for everybody's everybody's kindness. Like, I'm not trying to be a downer here. Just, like, I don't know, when people ask me questions about the future, it's hard to come up with optimistic answers right now. Like, it's kind of frustrating too, because I feel like in the past, when I've had a lot of feelings of negativity, like, a lot of it's been like personal or due to like some aspect of my personal situation, and I feel like a lot of that I've managed to get past, and I don't have problems with like myself or my like immediate social surroundings anymore, which is kind of great. It's just that I find myself kind of without like an industry or a thing that I think I can actually do, that I'm good at, that I feel like it matters, you know? And like, I've basically spent my whole life living in a cave, like doing computery stuff away from the humans, and at this point it feels like the humans are the only part of this thing that matters, and the computery things in the cave are just a silly distraction. But it's a silly distraction that I understand really well, so I'm still here doing it. And if anything, maybe I can just be here to convince a few of the people who think it's still like not just a silly distraction, but a thing that's going to save the world or whatever, and maybe give them a little bit more perspective. There's a question on whether there's some approach I'd recommend for learning technical skills. And they're saying that they're trying to learn back-end stuff, but the number of things that they need to learn is just crushing. I'm not really sure what to say to that, because I feel like that experience of like, there's an overwhelming amount of information here, like that never goes away. Like, there's no amount of learning computers that causes the amount left to learn to no longer be overwhelming. Like, that's just the nature of it. That is the thing that we are engaged in as humans here, is just creating a giant pile of facts and arbitrary decisions that all like contribute to a system that is itself far beyond any individual person's understanding. So that never really goes away. I mean, you just kind of learn to manage that differently. Like, it kind of helps if you can find something, at least in my experience, it kind of helps if you can find something that you have a lot of motivation to figure out, and then you can just like follow little bits of obsession as they happen and use that to fuel a deeper understanding. Because I've had good luck with at least like trying to understand systems pretty deeply by finding something I'm really interested in, like stripping down to its bare pieces and reassembling, whether metaphorically or physically. So, I mean, that's worked for me, but I wouldn't call it like an effective or humane solution. I would just say that it's worked for me, and I don't know that there is an effective and humane way to learn technology, because it seems like the nature of it is to be constantly on the edge of what people are actually comfortable with dealing in, and like we're constantly building these systems that no one quite understands and convincing ourselves that it's fine. getting so many spam voicemails on a number that I've literally never given anyone. Kind of funny. At this point, I'm probably just gonna like try to throw it out and get a new number, or just not even use that app. I mean, I'm not seeing swap outs on top right now, but it's gotta be swapping a lot. Just so I don't know which of these two lights are which, but the light on the right is blinking a lot right now. That's completely illegible. Yeah. These LEDs have a very narrow viewing angle because of how they're mounted behind the front panel. Over there, Dad. I see this stream is turning into discuss depressing, overarching themes in life while we wait for things to swap. Also, cat. I mean, I might just decide that I should never actually run the package manager on this machine. Since, like, a lot of things seem to work okay, but I've had a pretty bad time running APK on here locally so far. I wonder what this is even doing right now. I'm not getting any response from this SSH, and the other one is still trying to log in. Just gonna need separate thermal zones here for my two housemates. Like, the main thing that helped me learn technical skills in the past was having a project that I was like really obsessed with to an unhealthy degree, and having basically nothing else in my life going on. That combination is pretty powerful. But the problem is I wouldn't actually recommend it. It would be unethical to recommend that to anyone, right? So I don't know what to do. I've been in this position for a while where people ask, like, oh, how did you do this? And I'm like, oh, by completely non-recommendable means. And so I don't really know where to go from there. And like for a while, I was pretty interested in finding other ways to help people try to, you know, get comfortable with technology that are not so unhealthy. But I have trouble wanting to do that at this point either, because it feels like there's nothing ultimately actually okay to do with technology on the whole. Like occasionally you find things here and there that are not especially harmful, but on the whole, I don't know that like getting more people more interested in more computer things is actually the route that we need to be going down at this point. But yeah, like long-term goal, we should just use probably less technology and probably use it more judiciously. And in the short term, I think at the very least, we probably need to try to, get people interested in like class analysis at a faster rate than we are getting people interested in computers. And like it's funny that we see so many people running projects to like cultivate interest in computers and STEM and whatever they want to call it, because so much of this stuff just advertises itself. Like you see this source of power, this like, digital fountain of youth or sword in the stone or whatever metaphor that people are searching for, and you think you need to advertise that more? I don't understand that anymore. This question, what do I mean by class analysis? I mean, like understanding things from not just a perspective of, like what is the computer doing, but like what do all the different pieces of society do in relation to this thing or this piece of technology? Like how do people use this to exert like social pressures on other people? How does it uphold boundaries in social classes that we have? How is this used to keep some people rich and keep some people poor? That's the kind of thing that we need to spend more time understanding in technology than like the technology itself. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Find a problem and then figure out the things that you need to learn in order to fix that problem. That's like the basic main loop of doing things with technology, right? Like it's not nearly as, I feel like that's maybe a thing that more people should understand, is that technology, the way we practice it right now, it isn't like structured the way like mechanical engineering or like city planning or basically any professional discipline. Like most of what we think of as technology, right, is really the Wild West of building up piles of complexity. It's not just technology, because we have a lot of fields of technology that are very well developed and regulated and understood. But then we have people making websites and crypto coins and whatever, just like doing something that seems good at the time without really understanding what they're doing. And that's the stuff that we feel the need to get people extra excited about for some reason. But I mean, that basic loop of trying to solve a problem by just figuring out what the next step is and moving in that direction is pretty universal. And like, you don't really know where you're going or how long it's going to take, but you can eventually solve most problems via that method. So people rightly end up seeing that there's a lot of power in it, but then they like let that power go to their head. And like, really, it's just that the technique of kind of making a random walk toward things that work better, like will solve a lot of problems. But then people somehow take that to mean that like they're personally really good at solving problems. So yeah, motivation, perspective, just picking something and trying to understand it or trying to fix it or trying to like go in some direction. Like it just takes a lot of time and a lot of frustration. Like it's I think if you're expecting there to be a particular route you can follow to just know how to do computers better instantly, like you can learn a particular technology relatively easily, but like getting more comfortable with that process of just figuring out something that you don't even know how to figure out is its own skill, and I think it just kind of takes a bunch of frustration to get there. There's a comment that blinking lights and shiny graphs go a long way to get some interest in the field. That is a big part of why I stopped doing blinking lights, honestly. Is this still completely unresponsive? I mean, top is still refreshing, right? I say that and then I'm looking over and I haven't seen top refresh in a while. Are we just in swapping hell now? Yeah, I don't know if top is even still refreshing. Right, that's where it's at. I don't want to make technology, I want to hug cats. Those are words to live by. I think I'm gonna try to figure out how to organize my life more around cats. I think I need more perspective about cat though too. Like Tuco is a lot of cat. I don't think all cats are like Tuco. I think 12 and 13 are write and read in some order. Yeah, 12 is read, 13 is write. So we are doing a lot of reading from the disk, looks like. I think the disk is what's at IO of OX410. You done with that too? Tuco, why is he eating the mess he made instead of eating the fresh food? Tuco, you're so weird. Yeah, eat that. There's a question about where the swap is. It is locally on the same SD card that my rootfs and home file system are on, which I think we can access at about a megabyte per second. There is an additional SIM socket on this board. I have not confirmed whether it's standard RAM and whether this machine can actually take more RAM, but it's quite possible we could upgrade the memory. Oh gosh, there's a question about what brand of cat food Tuco likes. I don't know that Tuco likes anything at this point. He's very picky about food. The stuff he's eating right now, which is the stuff he seems to like the best at the moment, is this raw freeze-dried stuff that I think the brand is Stella and Chewy. And so I give it to him both raw or both dry and wet, because he seems to have different preferences different times of the day. I've basically just been trying a bunch of things to see if I can get him to eat as much as I can, since he doesn't usually eat quite as much as he needs to. Oh gosh, yeah, this is definitely faster than swapping over the network would be. Oh, I think I tried that a little bit earlier, and it was definitely not fun. Especially because I was trying to do storage over the same network interface. And now I'm getting scolded for using an SD card as a system drive. Do you have any better options here? Pretty sure the SD card has more endurance than, any period appropriate drives I would find. You went out again, too? Chico. I might just have to run a command per stream and let it complete between streams. I guess I should add these to my list of pre-installed packages while I'm here. big are these files anyway? Huh. Do you think this is working enough that I could reassemble it at this point? If I reassemble it, we don't have the oscope traces. It's harder to access the drive that has grub on it, but I can still access the serial port and the 2 PC card slots. Yeah, I don't know what approach to take with like transferring the proper amount of cynicism about computers, though. It's like people who are interested in computers are interested in a lot of really bad things. Like, I don't know that I can rely on any kind of common understanding at this point. Hey, boy. Doing the usual. Uh-huh. Anzug. God, this toy is dirtier than it was last time I saw it. One-eyed flamingo here. You can tell which direction they displayed this package. Gosh, the 486 has not made any visible progress from the APK ad pseudo. Surprised he isn't going right for the feather right now. I think he wants the catnip in the body of the flamingo. Oh, there's a question about whether there's anything bad in dmessage. Just like in general, or right now. Um, it's probably full of network card IRQ warnings. It doesn't seem to be failing right now at all. It just seems to be swapping. Why is it that anytime I do technology on the internet, I just have people telling me how to do technology on the internet? Like, I think that's what people actually want, right? Like, they don't want to show up and see me doing, like, whatever it is I'm doing. They just want to show up and see something that they can, like, remote control by explaining stuff at. Should I have a show where I just, like, pretend to not know how to do anything and people can explain it to me and I can like, do it slightly wrong to mess with them? Tuco, you're so small. You should eat more. Do you want that? Yeah, is it better if I shake it? Oh no, apparently someone says that they're 95% sure that that's a thing some Twitch streamers already do. Like the doing technology badly. I should just do that with this project. Be like, hey guys, my computer's having trouble booting. Can you help me? I don't know anything about computers, but I tried this Linux CD that someone gave me. Tuco, you're doing it. Yes. Eat the meat. It's especially good if he eats the meat and then he chews something that is not wires. Like he can chew a chew toy or chew some more meat. He often has the inclination to chew wires after he's eating, though. You want that again? Okay, so being wrong on the internet to boost engagement is definitely already a thing. I just think it would be funny to give, like there are so many people out there that would just love to explain some tech stuff at a person who is wrong about tech. It'd just be funny to give them some like really difficult problems. Like think of it as tech support scamming, or as tech support scam baiting, but for like mansplainers. I'd like to poke around and see if I can find any signs of progress here, but I don't really have any responsive terminals right now. Yeah, given how slow this thing writes, I'm not really too worried about the damage it would do by writing continuously, and it seems like we're spending most of our time reading right now anyway. This is also a new enough SD card that I'm pretty sure they would have a flash translation layer on it. A pay-per-view or a Patreon reward? That could be interesting. Yeah, I could get one of those jobs where I wake up at 4 in the morning and carry boxes at the grocery store and then come home and do streams for money where I argue with people on the internet and try to be wrong in amusing ways. That sounds like something. I don't know, cats are nice. Autofocus, not so much. There's a comment in chat that they plan to do gardening once they burn out on tech. That seems kind of nice. Like, I also just need to mostly find something that I can do, like, without burning myself out on social skills, and also probably without driving. Because I don't have a car, I don't really want to get a car again. That's been kind of a constraint I've set for myself for a while. There's a local electrical utility that might actually be kind of cool to work for. They seem to require that you can drive a truck, which is not a thing I can currently do. And like, I could try to get back into operating motor vehicles, but like, I don't really want that in my life, so if I can find a job that does not require motor vehicles, then that would be much nicer. Yeah, really people have figured out how to monetize that somebody is wrong on the internet urge, huh? I think there's some good birds outside that Tuco's really into now. Tuco, do you see a good bird? Do DevOps. Does anyone actually like DevOps? Yeah, that's an interesting question. I feel like I get plenty of just like trying to make things work, just trying to keep stuff like Diode Zone going. I don't know if I can handle another tech job at this point in my life. Like seriously, it's just extremely depressing. I think some of those bird noises are coming through the mic. Oh gosh, now somebody's asking me how old I am. I am in my late 30s. Yeah, I mean, I think anybody who's still like really enthusiastic about doing a particular kind of computer thing, they probably won't have a good answer to this question of like, what do you do after you're burned out on computers? Because it really, I feel like I've already made the rounds of like trying different kinds of computer things for a while, and it feels like there's something more fundamental there. Gosh, no visible progress in APK. Oh, we have a carriage return on one of the shells. Yeah, it's a little slow. The person in chat who's very enthusiastic about DevOps is wondering, they're asking somebody if they've done server setup. I don't know who specifically. I think a lot of us have probably done server setup. I mean, I've certainly got servers I've set up and servers that I'm running now. I think it's interesting for a while, but I think a lot of the same reasons people burn out on technology in general cause people to be burned out about servers. There's a question about what I find wrong with Rust, because it seems pretty hopeful so far. It's a mixed bag, right? Like, it seems like there are aspects of the Rust community that are good. There are also just massive parts of it that I would find like a problem to be involved in at all. There's also I don't know. There's a couple different ways to approach this, right? There's the community that actually exists. There's the software that actually exists. Like, what proportion of that is stuff that I would want to be involved in versus what proportion of it is like stuff that I just absolutely don't want to be associated with, and like, how does that mix influence how I feel about it? I could ask that about the community, about the projects people are using it for, about the companies that are sponsoring it. I was pretty excited about Rust when it seemed like it was a pretty friendly community of people making new kinds of infrastructure and having a community that was like atypically friendly to new systems programmers and to LGBT folks. It seemed like a just nicer than average environment in those ways. I feel like my feelings about Rust have cooled to the point where it's an interesting language, and I'm certainly going to use it for things, but I don't feel like I have this like rose-colored glasses feel about Rust anymore. Like I've seen enough of its social explosions, and I've seen enough projects that use it for terrible things that it just feels like another programming language at this point, like probably better for a lot of things than many programming languages, but it doesn't feel like this hopeful spot in computering anymore. It just feels like another aspect of it. There's a comment that a lot of the folks around them who used to work in IT and burned out became excavator operators. That could be interesting. I kind of just don't like operating vehicles though. Like maybe operating excavators would be different, but I feel like if I dislike driving a car, I don't think I'd want to drive an excavator. But something like that would be interesting, right? Like I would certainly be into doing something that involved like metal work or cable splicing or I don't know, digging or something. Like I don't know, just give me something that is actually useful and doesn't involve a keyboard. And if there's something useful I could do with this video studio, that would be great too. Jackhammer. Maybe. Is interest what concerns me with employment? Question mark. No, I mean, it's not interest so much as it's a lot of computer stuff, just whether or not a particular job is interesting or boring or whatever, it feels like the actual thing that we're accomplishing just sucks the life out of me. Like, I actually feel like I'm just surrounded a lot of the time with people who don't so much care what the effect of their work is, as long as it provides them interesting puzzles. And I feel like I need the exact opposite of that at this point. I need something that like has a concrete and clear effect for humans, and it doesn't matter whether the like minutia of it is interesting at this point, because that just feels so irrelevant to me. There are some very confused questions about whether the cat is stuck. No, he's just looking at birds outside. There's some interesting birds in the yard that he's quite interested in right now. And there's a suggestion that I should just work for a nonprofit. I mean, that feels kind of orthogonal to the decision that I am having more trouble with. Like, yes, obviously it would be great to work for a nonprofit relative to a company that's trying to make a profit. It feels like the more pressing decision is though, like, what do I even know how to do? Because I am not good with humans. I'm basically only good with computers. So yeah, maybe something I can do with my hands. Maybe something that involves, I don't know, cleaning toilets. There's a comment that I'm good at explaining technical stuff. The only technical stuff that I feel like I need to explain at this point is why people should do less technical stuff. And nobody seems to want to listen to me about that. So I guess right now we're just doing the cat stream while the computer chugs away at stuff. There's a comment that I've got to keep the lights on. I mean, well, yeah, that's where I've been for the last several years at this point, is like, well, I don't like this, but I've got to keep the lights on, and this is all I know how to do. But, like, there's only a limited amount of that exists. At some point, the burnout just reaches a new level, and then another new level, and it just keeps finding new levels. Like, I've been in some stage of burnout about this for almost 10 years. Duke, don't stand on that. Please. There's a comment that a bunch of things that this person knows and lists on their resume now might not be there without my videos, and I don't know what to say about that, because, like, I don't know that that's... I don't personally feel proud of helping people do technology at this point. I would feel better if I could convey some perspective about technology more than, like, the mechanics of how to do a thing. No. He really likes that. Maybe I can provide free, incorrect information about the fields that are eating the world. Like I could start a channel about crypto bucks or statistical scams, like whatever they're doing with AI these days. And I could just teach people how to do it in a way that involves just like some fundamental misunderstandings that'll take years to correct. I wouldn't charge people for that. I would just try to make it as much of a setback as possible for education in those fields. If you make it free, then more people will see it. We've already established that putting out incorrect information on the internet is a great way to get engagement, right? And engagement is, of course, the only currency that matters. Wait, how do I pay my utility bills and engagement? Like an ominous place for top to get stuck, right? We've got all those K workers in wait states. That's an interesting question. If the problem with tech is complexity, then if the problem with tech is complexity that lends itself to unethical use due to lack of transparency, how do we make super simple and obvious tech that can't be evil then? I think we've got a lot of it, right? Like we have pencils and printing. We even have a lot of computer technology that is relatively simple and obvious. It's just that isn't what is shiny, and that's not what gets money. Like, I feel like this is extremely not a problem in the technology domain at all. It's a problem of what people build and what people invest their time and money in and how money works. And yeah, start by abolishing capitalism. That's basically it though. Like, seriously though, is like, this isn't a technology problem, it's a human problem. And so like trying to come up with like the new technical solution is really just creating another instance of a like capitalist enterprise, and if you're trying to solve the problem within that framework, you're not going to eliminate the problem, which is the framework. There's a claim that technology is not evil. That's pretty bold. It's pretty important to understand technology through like the lens of how it makes power available and how it, conveys and restricts power, right? There's a comment that R&D work would be good for me. See, the problem with that is when you go into R&D, you end up making like weapons for somebody with tons of money. Like that's just how that works. There's a fundamental problem here, which is that people think that you need to be like good at computers to get a computer job. Nobody is good at computers. Like, none of the things that we do actually are any good. These things that we're doing with computers we're all just like making this up as we go along. There's people who have certain kinds of experience, but that doesn't mean that they're actually good at any of this. And so like this fiction that you need to like hire specific talented individuals just goes to reinforce the ways in which power is already allocated unevenly. And I mean, yeah, I feel like technology isn't necessarily always evil. There are certainly ways in which it's regularly used to help people. But I feel like technology as a concept and as a practical thing in the world is far from neutral. And it tends to be, not just like correlated with, but it tends to actually create new ways of centralizing power. It's part of why I'm so frustrated with a lot of the like quote unquote decentralized infrastructure that people are trying to design around crypto bucks these days, because so much of it is taking things that are fundamentally decentralized and have always been decentralized, and they're adding a new overarching system to control them, which doesn't seem like a decentralization strategy, as just like a way to gain control and kind of trick people into thinking that they need your thing when really the thing was like in everybody's hearts all along, There's a comment that global technological tyranny is where we're headed. I won't dispute that. I also don't think we have to like put our foot on the gas pedal, right? It just feels like so much of the field of computer technology these days is people like recognizing that we're heading in a bad direction and then just trying to go there as fast as possible while making as much money as possible because, it's inevitable, so they might as well get rich doing it. Like a lot of people I used to be friends with who used to be more idealistic about what they wanted to do with technology ended up going to work for some big company because they saw it as inevitable and wanted to be part of it. And I wonder how widespread that feeling is, right? Like, this is going to happen anyway. As long as I'm somewhere inside of it, I can make my mark on it or tilt it in a better direction or something. But I don't know that that ever actually happens. The person writing the code isn't the person with the power. They're just, I mean, they have a certain type of power. They have the labor power that anyone who can organize with their coworkers has. And some people are using that power. But there's also a lot of like delusion that people have a kind of power that they don't actually have in those situations. For anyone who's just tuning in here, I'm mostly just having a slightly depressing talk about technology while I wait on some technology. There's a question, how are we going in a bad direction though? Technology is so open for everyone. Are you serious? I can't tell if you're just joking right now. Like there was a lot of tech positivity decades ago because people saw technology as a way to connect people that weren't previously connected. But now we've entered this phase of it where we're no longer connecting people who used to be disconnected. We're creating like new kinds of prisons for people who previously weren't imprisoned. Like it's becoming harder and harder to actually just have any kind of space in the virtual world that is actually yours, whereas previously that was closer to the default. Like I used to be really into open source. I didn't really understand what open source was. Like it just seemed like it was a way of making software or like a way of interacting with computers. But really open source software is more of a political project, right? Like it has licenses, it has ideals that those licenses try to enforce. It has a way of thinking about freedom as the ability to tinker with your computer's source code. And it has evangelism based on those ideas. I mean, it's fundamentally a political activity. It's just been chosen in this way that doesn't actually have any meaning. Like, people get really interested in spreading this particular idea of freedom, but what does freedom to tinker with the source code on your computer actually give you when it would take like multiple lifetimes worth of study to actually like fully understand all of that source code? What does it mean when you still need effectively a network of trust to do anything with your computer? Whether it's like downloading some binaries that other people have compiled, or even just using some source code, or using your computer to communicate with people. Like the type of freedom that open source exclusively focuses on has very little meaning in those contexts. There's a comment that Twitch is connecting us. I don't know why that should matter, right? Like Twitch isn't the one that's connecting us. The internet is. We have an IP link. Just a lot of people have decided that rather than having any kind of direct connection, they would rather go to a global megacorp and have it tell you what's worth downloading. So we go to Twitch, and then Twitch has global rankings, and then we get everything through its servers, despite the fact that we're all connected to the same internet. So like, I'm guessing that you're young enough that you wouldn't remember IRC, but like there are many other ways that people connect on the internet, and a lot of them have been much more decentralized than what people currently take for granted. There's a comment that open source has been hijacked by large companies for the most part. I don't think large companies hijacked it so much as open source was always designed in a way that was kind of transparent to companies. So, like, open source basically cannot read the power structure of anything. It just assumes that individuals and companies all have equal ability to influence each other. There's a question about whether I have any other chats. So right now, the chats I've got are the ones built into YouTube and Twitch. I'm not currently running my own chat server because I'm an antisocial jerk. But for a while I was running a thing with Matrix, and then I was running a thing with... I wasn't running Matrix, I was using Gitter for a while and was thinking about running Matrix server. I never actually set up Matrix. I was using Big Blue Button for a minute, but that server is no longer running. But yeah, I mean, platforms, I really feel like kids these days or whatever, like people who are on the internet that don't remember the web before we had only 3 websites, you know, people need to learn what it's like to not be reliant on just a small number of platforms. And there's no new technology necessary for that. It's just like a perspective and values and social project. S486 is still doing the same things. Yeah, that's a good point, that the platforms make it hard to disconnect because they use psychological feedback loops to keep you interested in the walled gardens, and that it's sad that even software that's ostensibly open, like Mastodon, is emulating that. Yeah, it's kind of like the, what do they call it, the hedonic treadmill or whatever, like when you are kind of more and more insensitive to things that would have otherwise been pleasurable. It's like regular old Web 1.0 websites that a normal person can host on a single computer are no longer interesting enough for people. You have to have basically a casino run by a team of technicians. There's a question about the Gitter chat. I haven't currently been paying attention to the Gitter chat. It should still exist, but I just haven't used it in a while because I'm an antisocial weirdo, and I've had mixed feelings about the entire concept of having a chat on this stream. There's a question about whether we could develop a touchscreen driver update to sense large animals casting votes. Right? That would be easier if this was a multi-touch panel, but this is a fairly simple resistive touchscreen panel, so at this point it's just going to be registering there's a touch somewhere. I'm really worried about him putting that much weight on the screen, but it seems okay so far. He is also not as heavy as he should be. He was at the vet the other day and they weighed him at 10 pounds, which I'm used to him being more like 12 or 13. Anything more to ramble/rant about, or should I wrap this up? Looks like I basically can't interact with this computer until I let this finish or kill it, and I'd rather not kill it right now. There's a kind of general question about what is a driver and where does it take the data from. I guess in this case, do you mean like the touchscreen, or just in general, what is a driver? In general, a driver is one of those words that computer scientists/computer jerks use as if it means something, but it doesn't really actually mean anything. Like, in the earlier days of computer software, it used to be much more common for like the main program of just a regular command line application or something to be called the driver, because it's what drives the program's activities. And then you would have kind of other modules responsible for particular parts of that program. So that's one sense in which the word has been used. The way people tend to mean it right now, though, when you talk about a driver for something, is generally like an operating system level hardware driver. And so like, there are a lot of different forms that these can take, but generally it's a module that you load into the operating system kernel into a privileged address space and with privileges to access hardware directly. And it has that direct access, and in return, it's responsible for sharing the hardware between multiple programs that all want to use it. So a really classic driver would be something like a disk driver. You have a bunch of different programs that all want to read from a disk or write to a disk, and they submit requests, and then the driver is stuck there in the middle getting all those requests and deciding how to actually submit them to the hardware. So, and this is simplified, like in a real operating system, you'd have a whole layer of I/O scheduling and caching in between here. But the driver in the simplified example might be responsible for keeping a queue of operations that the disk needs to service, and then sending those out to the disk one at a time. And when the results come back, directing those to the right place, issuing completion callbacks or whatever. That's the kind of thing people often mean when they talk about a driver. And then in the operating system, you can end up having different ways of implementing that general functionality. So if the general thing that you're doing is arbitrating multiple access to a piece of hardware and taking care of the specifics of talking to it, the particular way you go about doing that might be like a loadable kernel module, or it might be a module that goes into the X server. It might even be a module that goes into a specific application. It used to be pretty common to have graphics drivers that you would load into individual CAD programs, for example. So that's like the top level overview of drivers, I guess. And that was a nice TLDR, though, telling the OS how to yell at the hardware. That's basically it. I mean, there's an aspect of privilege separation and multiplexing where, like, the driver has direct access, whereas applications don't, and the driver has exclusive access, whereas the applications have to share the hardware through the driver. That's all just kind of general, though. Like, there are always exceptions to these rules. Tuco's making me so nervous. I think I'm gonna scoop him up off that screen. Hey boy. Hey Fuzz. Oh, Tuco, are your green eyes triggering the chroma key? Tuco and his transparent eyes. It's a little creepy. I know the focus is a little off, but there we go. Couldn't actually move. Ouch. I should fuss with my OBS configuration so that I can have both chroma keyed and non-chroma keyed versions of this camera. Like, I've got the chroma key filter attached to the camera right now, and I think I need to make an intermediate scene and attach it to that scene. These artifacts are a little weird, although it is nice to not have just a giant green wall in the frame. If not for sit, why made of worm? Yes. There's a question about more detail on what a keyboard driver would do, for example. They're asking if it just reads a value in memory set by the OS, or if it's talking to the hardware ports directly. The way hardware interfaces to the CPU varies. A lot of hardware is actually just connected via memory mapped I/O, so like some hardware, the way you access it just looks like you're reading a variable in the OS, but like really it's a hardware I/O port. To make things a little more concrete, don't stand on that, please. No. So something like a PS2 keyboard, you would have an interrupt from the keyboard controller, which is actually just a tiny microcontroller that knows how to speak the serial protocol from the keyboard. No. Hey, honey. No. 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 No, 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 no. 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 Oh. Honey. Wait, are you really saying that I've got big arm muscles? I feel like they're really tiny, but maybe they were close to the camera or something. They're slightly less tiny when I'm actually like, working out a non-zero amount, but anyway, the keyboard driver. So like in that case, you'd be talking to some kind of hardware that speaks the serial protocol on the keyboard. So that might be, on some embedded systems, you might have like an SPI port or something on your system on chip. On a traditional x86 PC, that would be the i8042 keyboard microcontroller, which has some I/O ports attached to it. Anyway, the general flow of that is that the hardware is going to store a key press, and then it's going to try to get the CPU's attention with an interrupt. So your keyboard driver is going to register an interrupt handler, and in that interrupt, you'll move the key press from the hardware's buffer to a software buffer, and then notify anybody who's waiting on the software buffer. That's like the very high level overview. In practice, a keyboard driver would often just be like one instance of a generic human input driver. So you'd actually be talking about like a USB stack and a USB HID driver. And the instigating event then, instead of an interrupt from your keyboard microcontroller, it would be like an I/O completion interrupt from your USB host controller, indicating that you got a response to an in packet. Yeah, I mean, so it's funny. There's an interview question. I think I even mentioned this like a couple of streams ago. There's an interview question we used to have at work ages ago, where we just ask, like, you're at a computer and you type a command, just describe in as much detail as you can what happens. So we'd usually say, like, you're at a terminal, you type ls and press enter, just describe what happens. And so you can talk about so many different parts of the computer like that. You could talk about the file system, you could talk about disk, you could talk about process creation, you could talk about pseudo terminals. And I mean, if you're starting from the beginning, then like it does start from the keyboard. So usually the first thing is like you put your finger on the key, right? And it makes electrical contact. And there's a microcontroller in the keyboard, which is scanning a matrix of rows and columns to limit the number of IOs required to actually address all the keys. And so it'll be repeatedly scanning, and on one of its scans, it'll notice that there's a closure between one of the rows and one of the columns. And then it'll buffer that information, and next time the computer pulls it over the USB port by sending an in request on its interrupt endpoint, it'll have a packet ready to go in the USB hardware, the serial engine on the keyboard's microcontroller. So that keyboard microcontroller will send a response back to the USB in packet, and that packet will end up in the corresponding in endpoint buffer in the USB host controller. There will be an interrupt associated with that batch of transfers. And so the OS's USB host controller driver will get that interrupt, and it'll walk the USB schedule to figure out what USB transfers actually finished, and it'll deliver a completion callback to the USB human interface driver or HID driver. And the HID driver will use mappings from earlier that it established while reading the device's descriptors. It'll read the HID descriptor and create a mapping between the different bytes in the various packet formats the device could send out and Linux's internal input subsystem naming for those different axes and keys and everything. And so it'll use that mapping to translate the HID report that came back from the USB controller into Linux subsystem or Linux input subsystem events, which it'll then broadcast out through the Linux input subsystem to anybody who wants them. which, like, let's say this is, X11 or something, there'll be an XOR server sitting on a like dev input event, evdev device, where it'll get a wake up. So there'll be some thread on the X server that's sitting in a select loop or a poll loop, waiting for various events to happen, and IO on this evdev file will be one of those events. So anyway, you can just like keep going, and you can talk about how the X server draws fonts. You can talk about the file system. It's just, there's a lot to it. There's a question about what a dirty maid warning on TrueCrypt could mean. I don't know what TrueCrypt specifically does there. I mean, that's what they're probably referring to is this cryptography concept called, like I've heard it referred to as the evil maid attack. It's a attack vector where you assume that somebody has brief kind of unfettered access to the physical hardware on your computer. So the idea is, in this hypothetical scenario, somebody like, I don't know, like an evil housekeeper or whatever can use brief physical access to your computer to make some modification to it, which will then later be used to spy on you or exfiltrate data or something. So one way that you could do this in a lot of encrypted disk setups is, let's say you briefly have access to the computer, you want to plant some kind of bug in it or whatever. You can't just make a full copy of the disk image, and even if you could, it would be encrypted, so it would be of limited use. But you could use that brief access to, for example, plant a keylogger inside the keyboard. You could just open up the keyboard and put a chip in there, and then via any of several mechanisms, you could trigger that later to send back a log to some central location. And it could send it back via, like creating fake key presses or like modifying real key presses, or it could have its own radio. There's a bunch of options. So that's like one example of a hypothetical evil maid attack, is somebody like puts a logger bug inside your keyboard. There's software variants of that where if you have a boot disk or something, you boot off that, it can modify the boot sector on your actual hard disk so that it kind of wraps around the actual decryption engine. So let's say one variant of this is you install like an evil virtual machine on the hard disk. And so when you boot up, that evil virtual machine starts, and then inside that virtual machine, it runs your regular copy of Windows with TrueCrypt or whatever. And then you type your password into what seems like your regular boot up prompt, but actually it's this evil virtual machine. And because that was actually running and it actually has direct access to the hardware this whole time, it can store data, it can exfiltrate it however it wants. As for what TrueCrypt means by this, I would guess that it probably just means that some piece of software on your system is modifying the partition table or the boot sector in a way that it's not prepared to react to. So maybe it's like a dual booting thing, or maybe it's like a BIOS feature or some other kind of low-level piece of software on your system. But I would don't. It's like a strange enough threat scenario that I would be much more inclined to believe that this is a bug rather than something nefarious at this point. But I'm guessing it means that something that it expects not to change in one of the low-level parts of the either the partition table or the file system or the encryption structure is changing. So I can imagine some ways that could be done accidentally by some other piece of software in the system. It could also be malware, but I wouldn't necessarily jump to that conclusion. Oh, there's another question I just noticed. Who handles the interrupt, the OS or the driver? It's kind of both. The driver usually doesn't have to like set up the interrupt controller all by itself, and the driver is usually not managing the CPU's interrupt request or interrupt vector tables. Usually there is a function in the OS, like in Linux's kernel, the kernel proper. There's a function that the driver will call to request an IRQ, and so some common part of the OS is responsible for routing the IRQs and helping drivers share them, deciding which IRQs are available, managing like PCI stuff on systems that have PCI. But it's a joint effort. Like, the operating system has a lot of the common code that the drivers are going to need to get the interrupt and to acknowledge it. But then the drivers typically do actually supply some code that's part of the interrupt handler. So there typically will be some code that the driver itself is running in IRQ context. It might be like a USB completion callback. Like in that USB keyboard driver, it's going to be sending a USB transfer to the keyboard saying, you know, do an in on endpoint 1 or whatever, and just return when you have a packet. And that request is going to stay pending for a long time until the next key press, and then that key press completes the request, and then you send out another one to replace it. And that completion happens via the USB host controller interrupt. But from the keyboard driver's point of view, that's a callback function that lets it know that the USB transfer completed. So a lot of things that may not look directly like they are registering an interrupt handler do actually involve like responding to a hardware interrupt. And drivers can also choose how much work to do immediately versus how much to defer. If you have anything that's going to take like really any amount of time, or that could be blocked for any reason, you don't want to do it right away in the interrupt handler. It's usually better to defer it to something that looks more like a regular thread. So that's like if you run top or PS on a Linux machine and you see all those tasks in square brackets, those are kernel threads that typically handle stuff that has been deferred from interrupts. There's a comment about being antisocial, and they say they always have a quality time with themselves. Yeah, I do like that too. I mean, I get along with other people, but mostly just people who are also into alone time. I have a hard time with people who are like always socially on all the time, you know? I like doing operating systems kind of stuff sometimes. Feels, I don't know, like one of those more pure computer science problems where it's less about figuring out what the machine as a whole is trying to actually do and more about just making the two Lego pieces fit each other. But I don't know, it feels kind of hazardous to get too involved with small scale like goals like that without thinking about the larger scale. There's another question from chat. How do I start learning this stuff? The thing that you are watching me do is basically all there is to it. Like if you see me just like trying things and reading documentation and doing web searches and trying more things, like that's the entire process. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of patience. And so I usually advise people start with that. If you have something that you have time to do or you have patience for, just try to get more into that, and the underlying process of figuring out how things work in more detail is fairly generic. YouTube stream should have been a YouTube video, or he's suggesting I just release this as a separate video. I think I've got a couple of clips where I took some of my relatively self-contained stream rambles and turned them into videos, although I could probably do better if I was actually scripting something about this. I mean, I've been trying that though. Like, I keep running into a wall because I keep trying to do too much, I think. Like, I want to do, like, I want to make something that feels meaningful, but I also want it to actually have some context to exist in. So, like, I need to understand what the audience is and what I'm actually trying to say to that audience. And so that's kind of where I keep getting stuck. There's a question about whether I would consider something like Cube's OS to be a small OS. Cube's OS is more like a Linux distro than an OS, if I understand it right. Like, there are a lot of different things that people call an operating system nowadays, right? Like, if you want to get especially technical about it, most people think of the kernel and minimal set of user space to be the operating system, but a lot of people use the term to mean something more like a distribution of stuff that you would install on the computer all at once. Weird time of day to be doing leaf blowing outside, if that's what that is. Oh, can I close that fuzzboy? Gosh, how many hours now have I been waiting for apk add sudo? Alright, well, I think I'm going to actually wrap this up in just a sec. I'm just going to let this go and see if it eventually works. I'll try to have something lined up for the next stream that doesn't take so long. Maybe if I don't mind putting this thing back in the original case, we could just have like a physical reassembly stream. There's another question. How did I start to learn programming? Basically, I got started because I saw my dad using the computer that he got so that he could work. My dad was like a workaholic, space junk creator, basically. And he got what must have been a very expensive computer at the time so that he could work from home. And I don't think work paid for it. So it's like weird that he like went out of his way just so that he could like work even more. I don't know. I'm hoping work paid for it. I actually have no idea at this point. But yeah, so he had this PC that he would use for work, and I got interested in it at some point, and he got me started learning BASIC on there. And then he basically just like left me alone for a while. So there are a few different factors there. There's like access to the technology. there's access to some documentation. So I had a pile of books about it. Mostly it's desire to be in a room by myself doing something kind of detail oriented. That feels like the critical piece. Oh yeah, so I was running Alpine setup earlier. I left it running for a while. So Alpine setup was running overnight through like all of yesterday. So I think it was somewhere over 24 hours of Alpine setup. It wasn't actually running that whole time though. I think it got stuck during the APK cache setup at some point. I'll have to go check through the video I recorded of it. So I think at some point it just got stuck trying to set up the APK cache, and I killed it earlier on this stream. And I started to do some other stuff. I had a whole plan of things I wanted to do, and I just wanted to have an SSH login for that first. But this whole stream, I've just been trying to get an SSH login. It took it forever to run SSH keygen. And now I'm trying to install sudo. I have SSH. I can SSH into this from other machines on my network. It's just so slow right now, I can't even get a prompt, which is not SSH's fault on its own. SSH was working fine until I did this APK add. I think the issue is just that the package manager is thrashing my swap way too much. There's another request for context. So we're running Alpine Linux on a 486 that is part of a voting machine. It is this thing over here. I should raise this camera. So that is the board we've been running on. There's that screen. 1024 by 768 screen. 24-bit per pixel video bus. Although it's been much faster to run it at lower color depths, so I've been running it at 16 bits or 8 bits. There's our 32 megs of RAM. That AMD chip in the BGA package is the system on chip. You can see the BIOS behind it and the video chip in front of it. Video RAM is soldered to the board. Super I/O chip is behind that little stand-up daughter board there. And then the stand-up daughter board is a LVDS adapter for the graphics. That's the compact flash slot that it boots off of. And those are the PC card slots. And there's a question about whether it's an OG 486 or like a later model 486. It's actually kind of a later 486, but from the like mid-90s timeframe. I think the date on that processor, so the processor is an AMD SC400. I think it's from like 1996 or 97 or something. It's a pretty highly integrated system on chip 486. It's almost certainly the newest chip on this board. And that one right below it is the graphics chip, which is on a VISA local bus. It's a Chipsentech 65550. So yeah, I've got Grub installed on that compact flash card, and then everything else is running on an SD card that's in a couple of adapters on that rightmost slot there. Yeah, it'd be interesting. There's a comment in chat that they once bought an old point of sale system to make it into a retro gaming machine. That's pretty cool. I've been trying to get this thing running an operating system that'll let me rotate the screen into portrait mode. So far that's been basically Linux. It's the only thing I know because I've been using Xorg's screen rotation. It's been pretty disappointing though. I discovered kind of late on that the screen rotation actually disables most of the 2D acceleration in the driver. So it's much slower with a rotated screen than in landscape mode. But yeah, if I could rotate the screen in DOS or Windows, it'd be much more interesting to try those maybe. But so far I've only got screen rotation support for Xorg. I had DOS and Windows running on this earlier by putting them on the CF card. I kind of also want to see if I can do a boot off of the PCMCIA card, maybe with like a RAM disk, or possibly by even just having DOS recognize that PC card as a hard disk the same way I had Grub doing that. Well, thanks for stopping by for today's stream. I'm going to let this apk add sudo run. Hopefully we'll have some packages. But yeah, I might just need to find a better way to do package management on here, like maybe under QEMU, or just maybe not manage packages on the device at all and just, build a fresh image anytime I want to download anything. It doesn't seem great either, does it? Oh yeah, there's a comment that it's strange to see actually how green the place is. Yeah, it's a very green wall. It's I tried to make it very green, and I think it's doing the job all right. I've got the other walls painted black to reduce the color spill. I really should have picked a different color cat water fountain, huh? All right, have a good night. Enjoy your ceremonial bird roasting or whatever if you're doing that. I think I'll be streaming again tomorrow. I don't know exactly when. It'll be an early stream or a late stream, but I'll be back a little bit, I think, at least. If not, just to give folks an update on which commands I've finished running. Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully I'll have something better than that. Have a good night, folks. See you later.